ChaiTime. I think we're live now, and I'm still here in my little office in Cambridge, and we've got a really lively, interesting panel here today. I'm not sure how much biotech we're going to get out of them because we just keep sort of laughing and chewing the fat a little bit, but we'll try and juice what good information we can from them today. The topic is really around virtual drug discovery, open innovation, and how to sort of create superior investor returns on the back of that. And I did actually jump into the loft because in 1999, showing my age here, is I wrote my dissertation for my MBA in 1999 on it's backwards here, but it's on the emergence of drug development by Sunil Shah. And it was sponsored by 4 major pharma. So I managed to get 20 grand out of Pfizer, Solvay, Schering-Plough and Bayer to write this dissertation, and I had to keep it top secret for 2 years or something. So it went in the confidential Cambridge University library.
And you read it
anyway,
every week to remind you.
And I managed to just a manual of how we've done so well over 20 years. But yeah, so I do know a thing or two about this topic, obviously, as we do run a outsourcing outfit, amongst other things. So we have a really, I would say, a esteemed panel today, and it's really, really appreciate them giving up their time to come on. So I'll start by age. So I'll go Harren. So we'll go age first. So Harren, maybe, I mean, people probably know you, but maybe you can give a brief description of what you've done and why, why you should be here.
Yeah, well, I should be here because I responded to your invitation. That's why I'm here. No, seriously. So yes, with youngest first, obviously, as you said, I'm Harren Jhoti. I'm president and CEO of Astex Pharmaceuticals. So I set up Astex with a couple of profs there from Cambridge University, and assisted also by another former director of Abingworth's venture capital firm, Roberto Solari. We set it up in '99, and really the focus was to build a drug discovery company to exploit this, or develop and then exploit this approach, which is now called fragment-based drug discovery. Actually, at the time, that term didn't exist, and the first coinage of that really was in 2002 in one of our papers. So now fragment-based drug discovery, I think a lot of people know a lot about it, and it's utilized across the board in industry and in academia as well. And so that really was, the idea behind the company. So over the last 20 years, we've had a lot of fun, and also experienced a lot of challenges as well. So this is a real company in the sense it's not a virtual company, but we do a lot of kind of open innovation, and a lot of collaboration with different types of organizations, such as virtual organizations. And so we've been able over the years to actually be reasonably successful in the sense that we've managed to be responsible, or be partly responsible for 2 drugs which are approved now, 2 cancer treatments. One we developed with Novartis, it's a breast cancer drug called Kisqali, and which got approved in 2017. And in 2019, we had our second drug approved, which is a collaboration with J&J. It's a bladder cancer drug called Balversa. So in a nutshell, the technology clearly works, and we've been able to exploit it to come up with medicines for patients. And I'm sure during this discussion, I can maybe comment on some facets of that journey, which we've traveled at Astex. So I think I'll stop there. And
thanks, Harren. I didn't mean why you should be. I meant why you should be in this debate. And I think you mentioned it, is that in this whole virtualization of drug discovery, you take more of a hybrid approach, and we'll come to Matt in a second, who's maybe become much more virtual. But you've taken an approach, Astex, that you have a fairly substantial team of scientists in-house, and that's been your sort of model from the very beginning, to keep a significant core and maybe work through more collaboration partnerships, but keep a very sort of significant core in-house. And I want to sort of, in the later discussion, delve into which bits you thought were really core to your success to keep in-house, and which thoughts you think you can collaborate and partner on. So what do you think your engine was? So I'll come back to you on that in the second line of questioning. Sticking with age, I'm going to Chas next, I'm guessing. So Chas, thank you for coming on. Look, you're a very busy man, and we've had this in the diary for probably about 3 months so that we could have you here. And I'll let you introduce yourself, but obviously we appreciate you coming on. So maybe just give a little bit of background as well.
Well, Sunil, delighted to be here, and thanks for the invite. And it's good to see old friends as well. So, I worked in GSK in its various guises for nearly 19 years. And then nearly 13 years ago, I came back to Oxford. And my interest had very much been around trying to come up with new targets for drug discovery. And for the past 12 or so years in Oxford, what I've been doing is really pushing open innovation. And now, a couple of years ago, I was asked to help local students and local academics translate their research and create new companies. And so now we're creating about 20 odd new companies a year in Oxford. We're trying to attract investors and industry and entrepreneurs, et cetera, et cetera. So we're building on that open innovation, but we recognize, like everybody, that as we get closer to the clinic, we need to do things in a more proprietary manner, more traditional manner. So I'll contribute on the open innovation bit, if you like.
Yeah, I remember you, championing this whole space. Probably about 10 years ago, we had a discussion in Science Park, and you've given a number of talks of why you think it's a better model for developing much needed drugs for patients, and the old model was broken. So we'll be looking to sort of tear into that a little bit. But you have a new role as well, right? So you are the Pro Vice Chancellor of Innovation for Oxford. So are you able to work on your earlier projects in your new role? Is it pretty much now opening up the university, managing COVID, and sorting out the parking?
No, I'm continuing my research group, and in fact, one of the things that we're currently doing now is building a new Center for Medicines Discovery. And but I carry on the sort of drug discovery bits, and I can share with you a little bit about what we're doing in the Center for Medicines Discovery. We're creating focus groups working in different therapeutic areas. So dementia, mental health, inflammatory diseases, antivirals, rare diseases, etc. So the great thing in Oxford, like many other places, we've got some amazing clinicians, we've got lots of brilliant academics, and we want to work with specific industry partners in each of these different therapeutic areas. So that's the plan. We're trying to build on, more than a decade of open innovation, and we now want to sort of catalyze the translation of that into the clinic.
Thank you, Chas. Matt, so we've known each other for probably 20 odd years, and a great academic and an entrepreneur. So maybe you can give us a little bit about your background.
Sure, Matt, I'm from Oz. Great to see everyone. Please do ask questions and make it more interactive so we stay awake. Look, I'm focused on infectious diseases. I've been running an academic group there for a long time, and actually opened up what may be the first crowdsourcing of molecules and molecular diversity called COAD, Community for Open and Microbial Discoveries, where chemists send molecules, we screen them for free. That was supported by Wellcome, but it was trying to collate and curate molecular diversity from chemistry all around the world. These 85 million compounds were made. Inflammatory diseases and neurodegeneration and oncology, other focuses. So I'm a professor, but I'm also an entrepreneur. I've founded 4 companies and been involved with 10. I've done both. So I've done the fully virtual model, which was Inflazome. So no labs at all, just some really great people in a small room with a couple of laptops and some phones. And I remember my very first company, Abingworth Batch, we had a clean room and 3-phase power and fume hoods. We had to get a lab manager, then we had to get all the safety, then we got a contract with the army, had to get all the BSL-3 certifications. And I was running around like a headless chook for a year, just in operational mode. And you don't then, because you have to build this organic thing, and you're not really thinking about the bigger decisions in the project. So I think having both experiences And the way that the CRO network has moved, 20 years ago, there were only a couple of people. You had here in Cambridge, you had Alan Marshington, yourself, there were a few entrepreneurs, but that's changed completely now. So I think the whole CRO world has evolved as well. So happy to share learnings on both models and how the pluses and minuses of that.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I think the first question is going to be around what do we think is core to keeping in-house? I mean, it's great that we've got someone from a more less virtual model, totally virtual and open source. And I think Oxford as well is very collaborative in the way it works. But in terms of building a biotech company, let's say, what do we think is core to our functioning to ensure that we have valuable exits as we move forward? So what do we think is core to the business? So maybe I'll start with Harren, because you've kept a significant amount of your capabilities in-house and core. So what do you think, when you did the deal with Otsuka, what did they really value that you bought?
Yeah, thanks, Anil. So just in terms of background, so we got acquired by Otsuka in 2013. And what they were looking for, I believe, was a company which provides an approach to drug discovery, which you could argue is more cutting edge than perhaps what they had back in their Tokushima Research Institute, which is their main research center back in Japan. So they're looking for expertise, they're looking for people, they're looking for technology as well as programs. So it's a combination of all. And I mean, M&As happen for a whole variety of reasons. Some companies come in looking for a particular asset. Some companies look for a particular type of technology. In our case, I think it was pretty much across the board. And the way you can really test that out is what happened after the acquisition. So 6 years, 7 years down the road, not only have they invested in the portfolio that we had, which were clinical compounds in phase 2, and they've gone on and actually we just had one approved in COVID. They said not only did they invest in the actual pipeline, they actually also invested in the technology and the research capabilities. So the site here in Cambridge, which is where all the research happens for Astex, that has doubled in size. So
how many people are you now? Or how many?
So we're 100. Yeah, so we're 150 people here in Cambridge, so we're approximately half that when we got acquired, and we also have a clinical development site over in California on the East Bay. And that's more or less around 120 people as well. So that's a little bit on the acquisition.
Yeah. Sorry, Harren. A little bit on the acquisition. I mean, one of the issues that it kind of relates to this, but the government have been discussing, various organisations we're part of, is how do we keep more of our scientific talent within the UK? Should we be looking to sell to overseas companies? There's a big debate right now with ARM going on in Cambridge. Do we have the capital ticket for our capital markets? Are maybe not very efficient. No one really wants to IPO in this country, but it sounds like an investment from a Japanese pharma company into Astex, and you've doubled the number of scientists and created quite high value jobs. So do you think from your perspective, it's actually worked being acquired by a overseas body?
Yeah, that's right. So there's this ongoing discussion about whether we should build and scale up internally within the UK. And just so that you're aware, Astex was a UK company, but then we merged with a US company in 2011. So at the time of the acquisition, we were actually a NASDAQ listed company. So we were a public company at that time. And the reason for that merger was fundamentally, we didn't see a way that we could go onto the public markets here in the UK. There simply wasn't appetite for a company with our profile, which is really sad to say, given a similar profile company could easily have gone public in the US, and often our US VCs used to say, if you've been in the US, you could have gone public easily. But coming back to your point, I think that's a very good point, that building a company and going IPO isn't the only mark of success. When a company gets acquired by another company from abroad, and as long as they invest in the UK research and development base, that is also a sign of success for UK PLC as a whole. So, success can be seen in many different ways. And I think the fact that we've continued to develop and the Japanese have continued to invest in Astex is a good measure.
So to summarize, I think having a significant core in-house made it attractive for someone like Otsuka to acquire you, because they're not only acquiring the products, the drugs, which obviously they can value, but there's another value for them there. They wanted a base in the UK. There's a scientific credibility that you'd sort of built up the talent base, and they wanted to have that have that core within Cambridge ecosystem. So there was a lot more to add by keeping it in-house, and you probably got a better price for it maybe by just selling the drugs. You think? I think it was $860 million.
Yeah, so we sold for $886 million, which was a pretty significant number. And I think the fact that we were a US public company actually was a factor in that. Had we been a private UK company, I'm not convinced we would have got anywhere near that kind of valuation. But I think also coming back and touching on the open innovation element, I think that was another strategic reason Otsuka wanted to acquire a company like us, because we're sitting here in Cambridge, one of the major biotech ecosystems of Europe, and this whole ability for us to engage in open innovation it was another key driver for them. That's for sure.
Thank you, Harren. So Matt, you've more recently sold your business to Roche, publicly announced for close to $500 million up front, and other money to follow. You have a much more virtual outfit. How many employees do you have, and what level of core expertise did you keep in house?
So we were 7 FTEs for most of the company's history, and when we were sold, I think it was 12 FTEs, 14 people, 8 of which in Cambridge, 1 in Australia, and then a couple in Dublin. So we were a very, very small team. Obviously, everyone's covering multiple roles, so it is a bit of a stretch. But the best thing is you just make decisions. If you're only 12 people, you have everyone on the call. Everyone can have an input. There's probably 8 scientists in that group. Everyone's involved and engaged. So in terms of decision making and also proceeding at risk, in some cases you have a project where you've got data, and then there's a review period, a committee, et cetera. That gap can be quite big. We would always dovetail things. So when we had 90% of the data and it was looking good, we'd start the next activity at risk, hoping that, knowing that most of the time things would work out. So it went wrong once or twice, but we shaved off at least 12 months off the development plan. So the core is the understanding of whatever the particular target and clinical relevance is, immunology or whether it be GPCRs. I mean, in some cases with Harren, it was a technology platform. Heptares was the same. Those companies in that model, although engaged early on the value of the platform, then morphed into the value of the assets as the primary valuation inflection point. So we had a very small team. We hired excellent people that had been around for 20, 30 years in pharma. For various reasons, didn't want to work in pharma anymore. That happens a lot. That's why people do startups. But then even when it was just me and another guy, I shortlisted 8 CROs, and I went and visited every single one of them, and I talked to the chemists and the team, and really do your due diligence, get to know the CRO. Different CROs are good at different things. So we always had chemistry in the UK, we had some in Canada, we had some in India, we had some in China, we had in the Netherlands, we had some radiolabel chemistry and triage stuff. But the downside of the project management, the upside is you can go incredibly fast because you don't need ethics approval and major, all that organizational HR aspect. You can take very small, you can start with a very cogent and tight team, which helps you, I think, with decision making because everyone's across most data rather than having various departments. And that's flexible. When things are going well or you want to explore something, you dial it up. And if you want to wait till a certain data point comes through, and you can dial it down. So that flexibility is a huge advantage. Also with COVID and other things, you can move things around very quickly.
Did you find that a lot of the say the value base of the platform, and you have probably a fairly deep knowledge around the inflammasomes, did you find that having that subcontracted, that part of the biology was a disadvantage, or something like Heptares tried to keep a lot of their knowledge around GPCRs in-house, the platform tech? What was your thinking around outsourcing that aspect of the...
So we drove the program. We designed the experiments. We had, you know, photo affinity tags and Trinidad ligands and pull downs and expression systems and all those things you would do, right, to understand mechanism and understand the clinical relevance of that. But it was outsourced. I think the downside, if something's really bespoke, so you've got target X and there's a particular model or whatever, you know, do develop that internally or collaborate with an academic lab, or, you know, get one of the Milner Institute here in Cambridge, an example where you can actually put a couple of postdocs who really care about it and will ask the scientific questions and go that little bit further. The flip side of the CROs is they will basically do what you tell them to do on the whole. When they're small, though, they can be very adept and science-driven and intrigued and motivated, which is what you want in your team. But when they get acquired by some of these larger, big conglomerates, those people tend to get, you know, disenfranchised. So it does need, you know, it needs really, really good project management. There are, you know, there's been situations which I won't go into where we've had to fix this because this CRO's made a balls up and this mistake's happened. And so you haven't got the level of control, but you can just keep on placing contracts. You can keep on placing work. And as the program changes and your assets develop, you can change it very quickly. You don't have to go and hire 20 more people and interview and build another lab and wait for this and all the CapEx and, you know, the administration that comes with it. So I think the maturity of the CRO landscape is such that you can trust people more, and they've all got brains, they're all interested, they've all got ideas. That's another big advantage.
And when Roche came to acquire you, and you obviously went through probably a decent process with them, what was that? How did they assign the value to the company? It's a significant amount. It's probably the largest deal that I've seen of a company at this stage ever. How do you think they assigned the value? Was it just on the assets and the drugs and the chemical matter, or did they put value on the platform?
I think with most sales, the value situation goes through head of R&D to the CFO to the CEO. And so there are on the buy side, every company's got their risk adjusted NPV and their landscape analysis, and this asset's worth X, Y, and Z. They look at the comparatives over the last 5 years, yada, yada, yada. So that's all standard. I think for us, we were recognized as pioneers in the field. They knew that we'd read every single paper, we'd gone deep. It was also it is a science-driven organization. So that had some value, but I think financially it's probably not what you think it would be. I mean, they really are buying in our case, we had 44 patents, we had pioneering chemistry, that was the main value. And also we'd finished our early clinical trials. So that was the main thing. I think in some cases, like Atari's and Astex is a good example, amazing platforms, really, you know, bleeding edge industrialization and techniques and tools. But then over time, that gets less valued. It's more about the molecule and where it is in the clinical progression stage.
So that for you, it's basically around the asset and the data that it was producing. That's really why they bought it. And they
like the speed. They wanted to know, how do we do this so quickly? How do we get 2 drugs through proof of concept in 4 years from the start? That was something that was...
Are you able to say anything about how Roche will now develop the company and the site? Will they bring more people to the company, or it's going to keep it fairly virtual?
We're now, you know, we're part of Roche. So Roche is a very significant pharma company, you know, still family owned, has some advantages. They've got a very clear strategy. We would not have sold this asset as the management team unless they were going to do lots of multiple clinical trials in parallel. So, you know, the money is one thing, money comes and goes, but it was all about the patients. So yes, they have multiple trials. I can't comment on what they are, but you'll see that coming out in the near future.
So coming to around the patients, you know, Chas was at a part of a very large pharma company with everything in-house, and he left that to champion this open innovation platform, which was a Structural Genomics Consortium, which was a total, complete, something very, very new at the time, and still is today, and it's now grown into something fairly substantial. You were championing this because you were like, patients need to have medicines faster, more cheaply. The whole model is broken. The whole R&D model is broken. Do you want to maybe tell a little bit about why you championed that and what the metrics are behind that?
Yes, Neil, thanks. I mean, you know, I think it is worth just reiterating before I answer that question. I mean, Harren's a modest guy, but let's face it, Otsuka acquired Astex partly to get Harren's brains, partly to get the assets and the pipeline that he'd created, and partly to get this platform that he'd created. And likewise with Matt, I mean, sort of, you know, the target that Matt's been working on, the inflammasome, the NLRP3, whatever target it is, you know, that is a very, very hot target at the moment. And what Matt and the team have done is sort of really deep biology and all the assays around it, as well as all the speed, etc. And that sort of expertise, you know, in that target's going to be valuable in so many disease areas. So I'm not at all surprised Roche are going to do multiple studies. So I have to say it's very exciting, and I do think we're lucky that we've got, frankly, people like yourself in the UK, because it's people like you who are going to attract more entrepreneurs and create more of these companies and create more of that sort of Boston, Stanford ecosystem, etc. But in terms of open innovation, Sunil, you know, I do think the biggest problem in drug discovery is being able to validate new targets. You know, that there's 20,000 genes, you know, there's lots of common diseases. Each common disease is lots of subtypes of disease. There's 7,000 rare diseases. And frankly, even today in 2020, our ability to say that if I take this novel target and if I inhibit it or modulate it, it's going to work in this disease or this subset of patients. I think our ability to do that, that target validation piece, is pretty awful. You know, we're not good at it. And so, you know, frankly, it's easy coming up with lots of targets. You know, we can pick tons out of the literature, and for each of those, we can identify 10 different disease opportunities, etc. That's so easy to do. So the reason I championed open innovation was because this was a way for me to work with lots of pharma companies. So, you know, recently we've been working with 10 different pharmaceutical companies. It was also a way of working with lots of academic labs. And so we've been working with close to 200 academic labs all over the world. And it was also a way for me to work with lots of patient organizations. So we've been working with 7 different disease foundations or patient organizations. And so we've literally just pulled that expertise and all that resource and infrastructure. And what we've done is we've been able to work on completely novel targets, completely novel, where there's no publications, nothing's known about them, etc. We've been able to open up new areas of biology. We've been able to do risky things because we were pooling resources. And there's no doubt what we have done is we've reduced duplication, we've reduced wastage, and we've accelerated innovation. So I think there's no doubt that open innovation is wonderful in that early discovery piece. But now, of course, you know, what Matt and Harren have been doing is they've been pushing molecules into the clinic, because ultimately that's where clinical validation happens. And that's now what we're trying to do in Oxford. We're trying to take all of these early discovery tools, which have been made freely available to the world. We're now trying to take some of those ideas, work with lots of clinicians, generate molecules that we can actually put into patients, and then do clinical studies in the sort of local NHS community, et cetera, et cetera. So, because ultimately that's where target validation happens. It happens in patients. It doesn't happen in animal models, and it doesn't happen in cell lines. So we need to get to that experimental medicine phase 2A clinical proof of concept as quickly as we can. That's where the big value is.
What aspects of open innovation do you think are most successful in sort of developing the model? Which areas do you think
we took a very extreme example. So we basically said that we're going to work on completely novel ideas, novel targets. There's no publications, nobody else is working on them, and we will generate high quality open tools. So by tools, I mean we would, you know, purify the protein, we would work out the structure, we would generate an inhibitor, we would build an assay. And all of these tools, all of these reagents, we would make freely available to the world. So absolutely no IP, we would publish them, we would give away the reagents to anybody in academia, anybody in biotech, anybody in pharma. And so that was a very extreme form. And of course, by doing that, we could work with lots of academics, lots of companies, lots of patient groups. We accelerated science, we accelerated early target discovery, we enabled lots of academics to work out the role of particular targets in particular biological pathways or disease pathways. We helped academics, frankly, create new companies. So the first company, I mean, the first inhibitor we generated was back in 2010. And Jay Bradner, who's now the head of research at Novartis, we generated that with him and with GSK, but he set up a company called Tensure Therapeutics in 2011 to take that target into the clinic. So this was an inhibitor for a protein called BRD4. And then in 2016, Matt, it was Roche who acquired Tensure Therapeutics, I think, for $535 million or something like this. So by generating these early discovery tools, high quality early discovery tools, we were helping academics create new enterprises and create new jobs.
It's fantastic. And what you've achieved and what you've done there is, you know, quite frankly, completely amazing. And I know you totally championed that from the beginning. It's really a huge achievement. Given that, I agree that the holy grail is trying to find good targets. If we find good targets, then we can, you know, we can find ways to drug them. But unless you've got good targets, it's really hard to get going with any program. And that is the holy grail for big pharma. When you talk to big pharma, you go there and you can try and sell them chemistry. I think that's fine. But ultimately, if you can go to them with this is an attractive target and we want to drug it, they will help you to do it, because everyone's trying to find that target that they can go after that has the appropriate validation, and that the bars to actually start a program now are getting higher and higher and higher, because the cost of doing drug discovery developments has got to such a scale that we try to do as much as possible at that early stage. So it's a question to really Matt and Harren first is, you know, how are we going to, you know, open innovation? Chas's group is one group. There are other, obviously, academic research out there, but how do you find your next target to go after? How, in a big pharma, Harren, in Otsuka, do you have people in-house trying to, you know, find the next amazing target? Or are you relying on open innovation or academic groups? So maybe the first question to Matt and then to Harren.
Yeah, so I think it's just it's all a dialogue. You know, stay on the literature all the time. The conferences are a bit hard to go to now, but you know, go and see some of the KOLs, particularly if it's a disease area where you're not that familiar. But yeah, I mean, these days there are lots of tools. There are lots of ways to mine data. There's lots of ways to do meta-analysis. There's lots of programs to make it easier. But I do find in terms of business and innovation, it's that chance meeting. It's the one you didn't plan for. It's the one you didn't realize. And I do think we tend to invest in our own ideas a little bit. That happens a lot. It's just natural because you worked on receptor X or receptor Y. But I think the key is just, you know, where possible, every day, every week, set aside some time and read. There's a lot of information in the public domain now. And what you then need to do is obviously go to the KOLs and try and engage in those people. We set up a clinical advisory board on SAB quite early. And for the inflammasome, as has been pointed out, you know, there were 54 indications on the shortlist for clinical trials, and that probably is now more than 100. So it was quite a challenge to pick the right, you know, you're defined by your early clinical data. So what of those 54, what were the first 3 or 4 we're going to go for in the clinic? And that takes time. It just takes time. So yeah, network, read. It's very boring advice, but it works.
So you're much more about seeing what's out there. There's so much available now, and sort of sift through it and come up with interesting drug targets rather than try and validate new drug targets yourself.
Well, the other thing is the business window. So you can see this in serial entrepreneurs like Harren and Chas and others. So inflammasome is a classic example. We had some grant funding, we'd done some chemistry, we funded it ourselves. It was shoestring stuff, but I knew it was going to be a race, and that's why we took venture capital for Inflazome, because we needed the speed to drive it. Other targets, you know, pharma aren't quite aware of them. Others are going to be in a hot space. So you can be too late often in business, but sometimes you can be too early. You know, a fantastic idea, a technology or target, and for whatever reason, commercially or in terms of clinical validation, it's not quite where it needs to be. So before you choose target X, you look at that commercial exit window as well.
Thanks, Matt. So Harren, same question to you really. Do you have target validation in-house? Is there some kind of core expertise that you've now developed within Astex or within Otsuka, or do you rely on external innovation and bring it in?
Yeah, I think it's certainly both, really. I mean, thinking back to when I was at Glaxo in the 90s, kind of around the same time as Chas was as well, there was a huge effort, as in most pharma companies, to do target validation, target discovery validation internally, and just do it by ourselves, so to speak. And I think pretty much we all failed. So it's very clear that this has to be done in collaboration. So we are very active in terms of engaging with academic groups, and one of the drugs I mentioned earlier, Balversa, which was which was a bladder drug, bladder cancer drug, which got approved last year. That came from a collaboration with a group at Newcastle University. It was Professor Herbie Newell who came up with the idea, the original concept, and the argument as to why an FGFR inhibitor with a certain profile would be something interesting to develop. And so, working with Newcastle over 7-8 years, we developed this concept. And then Janssen came in, and then they licensed the program, and then we carried on working with them, and hence we were very fortunate to have that approved. So I think the whole landscape now has changed, and it's thanks to definitely people like Chas transforming that kind of academic space to be able to do this, what we all call open innovation, which fundamentally is engagement with academics or academic industry engagement. And I think what it's also done on a more global level is actually broken down those silos. 20, 30 years ago, there was huge silos between big pharma and broadly the academic world. And this kind of concept of open innovation has been transformational, really, in breaking that down. So most, if not all, our ideas for new targets come from outside. What we do, though, is we do look to repeat some of the validation experiments because there's lots of groups that publish. There's a high percentage of publications which are on a validation of a target, which are sometimes not people are able to reproduce those in the same way. So reproducibility of target validation is certainly something that we need to be focused on. But yeah, so in answer to your question, we have to do both. But fundamentally, 99.9% of research is happening outside the walls of your company, whichever company you're in, right? So really, the chances are hugely stacked against you if you think you're going to discover a new target all by yourself and validate it and then go all the way.
Was that the president of Otsuka on the phone there saying, "Don't say that"? Messaging you. What are you saying? Values all in Otsuka, not external.
Sell.
Yeah. No, that was Donald Trump saying to Harren, "Does your drug work for COVID?"
So Chas, I mean, you are sort of right in the middle of this liaising between, you have the commercial pharmaceutical experience, and you've gone right the other end to open innovation. And so, given what you've learned, and you mentioned there's some new groups that you're championing within Oxford. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about those groups and how the next decade will look like for the commercial academic space.
Could I, before I do that, just pick up on something Matt said? Because I think it's incredibly important. I love the idea, network, read. One thing I would say is sort of, that we should do that, but we also sometimes need to go into completely novel, risky areas. And the reason I say that, Matt, Harren, Sunil, is that, I'm just conscious in the industry, for example, for 25 years, the whole pharmaceutical industry has worked on the amyloid hypothesis for dementia. There's thousands of publications, every pharma company, we've done loads of phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, every one by one, has failed. We probably, in that past 3 decades, invested more than $30 billion of resource into that area, and it's got us nothing. There are other examples, TRPV1 in pain. How many companies worked on that?
Yeah, or NAV 1.7 or P38 MAP kinase.
Yeah, NK1 antagonist for depression, etc. Again, you know, but if sometimes we just follow everybody else's lead and there's lots of papers, you know, we just go down.
I didn't mean that, Chas. I think if there's already 5 pharma working on it, there's no point you competing because they have more money and capital and structure.
Yeah.
But no, often you'll find something which is not really known or understood generally. So I think, you know, it's finding those emergent areas which is key. But, you know, if you know that 8 pharma companies are working on target X, there's no point going there. I agree with that entirely.
I agree. I think the other comment I would say is that, you know, in the past 2 decades, this industry has put more money into cancer research than any other area. And it's not surprising because, you know, I think, I'm not saying discovering a drug in cancer is easy, but I think it's easier than some of the other areas. And it's easier because, you know, you can access cancer cells from patients and you can study those. You know, when you get a drug on the market, cancer patients will tolerate horrendous side effects. Often the treatment in cancer may just be for a few weeks, few months, maybe towards the end of life. And in that situation, the patients or their carers, they'll pay anything for the drug, etc. So for all of those reasons, now I think what we're seeing is, and also in cancer, antibodies have been useful. You know, they're not, you can't use antibodies in, say, neuropsychiatric diseases. Now there's more, thankfully, more and more investment in inflammatory diseases like MAT, and more people realize there's a role for inflammation, not just in the joints, but in cancer, but also in the gut, in the respiratory tract, in the brain, etc. So now there's more emphasis on inflammation. But again, in inflammation, you can use antibodies and potentially you can study immune cells on patients, etc. So there are some big advantages there. What we somehow need to do is sort out neuropsychiatric diseases, especially mental health. I mean, you know, in mental health, we were worrying about this area in December last year, and now in this COVID, the situation's got even worse, and we're not even out of this pandemic, etc. So let me show you what we're now trying to do in Oxford is we're building this Centre for Medicines Discovery. In it, we're going to have these sort of, we call them therapeutic pillars. So we've got a group working on dementia and mental health, another one on inflammatory diseases, another one on rare diseases, another one on cardiometabolic diseases, another one on cancer potentially, another one on antivirals, etc. And each of these pillars, we've got lots of clinicians, lots of academics, and our aim is to have key industry partners linked to each of those pillars. So we want to bring all of these people together. We want to access local innovations in that area. We want to access sort of patient resources. We want to make use of sort of national infrastructures, you know, like Genomics England and UK Biobank, etc. So we want to create these sort of networks of people working in particular therapeutic areas to accelerate the generation of new medicines for patients. And, you know, we'll exploit some of our open outputs to allow us to do that, etc. So that's something we started to build in the past few months. So it's really building on the success of the SGC.
Yeah, I mean, can I just jump in there, Sunil? Yeah, I mean, that sounds really exciting, Chas, and you're absolutely right. You know, in terms of some disease areas have had a lot more attention than others. I mean, psychiatry is a very interesting area because Otsuka actually has a huge psychiatry franchise. In fact, it's their largest disease area. And one of the challenges, as you know very well, is the biology is just simply a lot less well characterized in psychiatry and or even neurodegeneration. But I think it comes back to, so these are the areas where we need more focus from the broader academic community and through partnerships with industry. For sure, that would be a huge help. But already that's beginning to change. And if you look at the VC funding for the last 2-3 years, you know, NeuroD is second only to oncology. So clearly the biology is beginning to bear fruit in terms of new potential targets, and coming back to the whole target validation. So to me, it's all to do with what areas of human biology are best characterized or best understood, and really that's kind of to a large degree drives where the interest in disease, different diseases kind of result, because there's no point carrying on investing in drug discovery programs in areas of biology which are still very difficult to understand, because you're going to have a lot of failures and soon the money will dry up. So it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg, I guess. But no, it's fantastic to see those types of initiatives coming out of Oxford.
I mean, you're absolutely right, of course, Harren. I mean, sort of, Kate Bingham, when she set up the Dementia Discovery Fund, what was it, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, pulled in a number of farmers, pulled in Alzheimer's Research UK, Alzheimer's Society, the UK government, created this $110 million or whatever, and now that's grown to nearly $250 million, etc. Now, in the past 4 or 5 years, they've created a lot of companies in that space and deliberately working in areas other than amyloid. And I think that's wonderful. And I wish we could do, Harren, something like that in mental health. And I wish we could do something like that in antimicrobial. It's interesting. I mean, antimicrobial, you would think that, we've generated antibiotics in the past. And, we're all worried that increasingly we're becoming resistant to existing antibiotics. Sally Davis has been talking about this for the past 5, 6, 7 years. Already today, 700,000 people a year are dying already because they are resistant to existing antibiotics. 2050, that's going to be 10 million people. And, you would think generating a molecule that kills a bug in a dish, if that molecule's got the right pharmacokinetics, it should work in patients. What, for some reason, we've not been able to come together to create enough critical mass to actually deliver in that area. And I think with the current pandemic, I think many people are going to learn many lessons. Healthcare is very important. Science and technology is very important. We need to do more international collaborations. And by golly, we need a sense of urgency in some of these.
Those are all good points. I've got a question for Sunil. So I agree with the endpoints. There are less than 300 people in the world working in the industry now. So there's a crisis for human capital there. Sunil, going back to the virtual versus organic build, from your side, you obviously work with big companies and small, not just in the UK, but what trends have you seen and what works from your perspective as a CRO, where you're dealing with a large company with lots of organic talent and labs and stuff versus a small one that's just trying to outsource everything? What have you found?
That's a great question, Matt. So from our perspective, we mainly work with a lot of the biotech industry. They're generally smaller, more virtual biotech companies. Obviously, we work with some which are semi-virtual as well. We find that most companies in this space feel very comfortable outsourcing the chemistry, and it may be because the industry is more mature. You can characterize a compound, and you sort of know what you've got when you see your NMR, ultimate HPLC. So it's kind of a bit more definitive. So I think people are very comfortable outsourcing drug discovery chemistry. And if you look in the US, they've been doing it maybe a little bit longer than we have here. But it's almost a given when a VC invests into biotech now that a good chunk of the chemistry will be outsourced. There are occasions where some chemistry will happen in-house, and we are seeing that trend somewhat. There'll be maybe a few of the chemistry, a bit of the chemistry in-house, maybe 10 or 20%, maybe some of the more challenging chemistry in some respects, but it's very, very novel and very new, very difficult. But 80, 90% of the chemistry guaranteed will be externalized. Where the interesting discussion comes is around the biology. And we saw maybe in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000, that significant amounts of the biology was being kept in-house. I mean, we started working with, example, for Heptares in the beginning, and they kept all their biology in-house. And we've seen that, maybe it's a mission or other, but they keep, the intellect is around the biology, and they wanted to keep that internally. And it was my perception then, when I was interested to see how we think this has changed, that the big pharma would acquire the company, not because of the chemistry talent, but for the biology talent that they've got in-house, and that would add value to the deal. Obviously, we know pharma ultimately want to buy drugs and they make money from selling drugs, but that biology core capability was maybe a significant part of the exit value. So keeping some of that in-house, I thought was key. We are now seeing trends of more complete programs being externalized, when it's the biology and the chemistry. And they may keep certain components around the biotech biology in-house, but significant proportions of the biology are being externalized now. Again, that could be partly due to the experience in the CROs around doing biology. But that we are sort of seeing that trend, which is why in O2h we're developing discovery biology capability in the UK, as well as able to transfer that into India. So we are developing in that space. It's not an advert for O2h, but it's just, you asked a question, so we...
Yeah, that's not what you're sort of trend. I mean, one thing we did a lot of work on was our cycle time from when we made a molecule, or designed a molecule and made it, when we could get our PK and early ADME and then feed it back in. And, you know, if you're having to separate out chemistry in this country and biology here, that can slow things down as well. So I think your core assays you're using all the time in the LO phase, put those with the chemistry. But you're right, there'll be some bespoke blood assay or some target or mechanistic assay where you really want to control that internally.
Yeah, in our CRO business unit, we are sending compounds around the world. It could be to academic labs in the US or to someone who's got the biology set up in China or the UK. So the compounds ship very well. You know, within 2 or 3 days, you can be in pretty much anywhere in the world, I would say. And the way the chemistry works, as you know, they're all sort of, it's in batches. You know, they're going to run the assay on the Monday, ship on the Thursday. You know, it's going to get there for the Monday morning. They can run their assays every week. So there's a way of doing things very, very efficiently. And I mean, it's not just our CRO. Most CROs are able to do that very well now, I would say. And I think that kind of works. A question to you guys really is, do you see a trend or a move away from just keeping the chemistry in-house to fully integrated programs being externalized? I leave it open to whoever wants to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just jump in here. So firstly, I just want to say that CROs have been a real lifeline for, I think, many companies, many biotech, even pharma companies during this pandemic. You know, obviously they were very important beforehand. But for example, you know, we had to close the site down for 2 months here in Cambridge. And so we had to, if we hadn't had the ongoing outsourcing through the CROs, effectively all the programs would have stopped. Now we're obviously in the process of looking to increase that to try to catch up with some of the milestones and the timelines that we set ourselves. And what we're now looking at is exactly what you just pointed to. We're looking at, you know, we obviously work with a whole range of different CROs and different, as I think Matt said earlier, some CROs do, you know, some activities better than others, etc. But we are now looking for a kind of fully integrated, kind of one-stop shop type options as well. And as well as that, we're looking to kind of diversify some of the risk in terms of some of the kind of geographical risk as well, because different countries, for example, if this pandemic continues, will be, you know, restricted at different times, and that might impact some of the CROs as well. So I think this, and you know, before I shut up, I think the whole CRO world is being totally transformed in the last 10, 20 years. I think 20 years ago, you know, certainly, you know, big pharma outsourcing to CRO would be very, you know, unusual, I would say. But now CROs provide such fantastic capabilities and very high level of science as well, and I think that's really just a real plus for the whole kind of life science ecosystem that we find ourselves in.
I mean, you've got to look at it this way. You know, O2h is one of the, I'm not sure if it's the newest or the oldest, but we've been doing this 18 years. So we've got kind of 17, 18 years of experience to actually get this right. And we're not the only ones. It's just, but you know, that's a lot of experience now within the CRO world of actually being able to develop, synthesize, make, evaluate molecules. And so there's a huge amount of experience within within the CROs and our collaborators around the world in that space. So
Yeah,
no, I totally agree. And they're quite chunky machines now. They're hundreds and thousands of people. Some of them are several thousand. We're sort of 300 people strong now. So they're quite.
Yeah, I think the other thing that has happened is we've seen big pharma kind of deconstructing a lot of their research capabilities, internally, either kind of accessing more biotech innovation or just fundamentally just reducing the research capability they have inside. And a lot of those people, very well trained people, have ended up in CROs. So that's had a huge positive impact, I'd say, in CROs.
Can I
Matt,
ask you?
yeah, go on, Chas.
I think we're all agreeing that, we're lucky we've got great entrepreneurs like yourself in the UK. We've got some great universities, we've got great CROs, but if we're comparing ourselves with, let's say, Boston, Basel, Shanghai, wherever, what do we have to do more of in the next decade to make us more like Boston, if you like, to create that very rich ecosystem where there's all the big farmers are here, there's lots of $50, $100 million biotechs, et cetera, et cetera. At the moment, we've got 2 farmers in this country worth more than 100 billion. All the big players are in Basel, Shanghai, Boston, San Diego. What do we have to do?
That's a great question for Matt, actually.
Yeah, build lots and lots of successful companies that maintain and grow, more Shires and more of those sorts of companies. I think that the mega trends of what GSK are doing, AstraZeneca are doing versus the competition, you won't be able to change that. I mean, clusters beget clusters, right? There's whole thesis. There's more MBAs than you can shake a stick at on why clusters work. The fundamentals of that is, fantastic clinical hospital or clinical hospitals, great universities, and entrepreneurial tax environment. The UK's actually got those. The big difference is the attitude and the cost of capital. So as we all know, we could get bang on at this all day, but you can raise 1.5 to 2.5x in the States for the same IP, same team, same business plan as you can here. That's crazy. Why is that arbitrage there? If this was an FX community, that would be arbitraged out. But also they will back it. They'll just put more money in a short period of time. So the fundamentals, I think, the organic fundamentals of bright people and the right cluster and the university and the hospital and science parks, we've already got that. It's really the attitude of the investment community behind it and the ability to drive at pace.
I think one thing we were missing, which we are now bringing in and developing, is that it's partly due to the maturity of the industry, but having young academic entrepreneurs like Matt who really understand the science, driving the companies, picking up the business skills, and be able to build a company. And he will attract money as much as he wants in his future businesses because he's had that success. He has the track record.
There is a bit of an attitude. If you're in academia, it's seen as you shouldn't be doing the commercial stuff. And if you're commercial, you've been an academic, you don't know anything. Whereas I think in the States, people ping pong backwards and forwards and no one even remarks on it, right? It's just, so I think there's a little bit of a chip on the shoulder here still with that, whether you're an academic or an entrepreneur.
I think that point, that is very important. I mean, I think that we do need more risk capital. I do think we need a lot more mobility for different stakeholders. Sort of in Boston, I get the sense, somebody's working in Harvard, they'll create a biotech and then they'll go and work in Novartis and then they'll go to MIT, etc. We need a bit more of that here as well. I also think maybe here we need to be a bit more ambitious. I think in the US there is a culture of, a bit more going for the moonshots. And I think in the process of trying to get to there, even if you don't get there, you'll make a couple of big step changes, and that's what's important. I can see Sunil's praying, I think. Sort of.
I'm praying for more entrepreneurs like Matt and Harren, you know, they've done fantastic jobs, and really it's been great for our industry to get more like that. I think that is really the key thing that we were missing, because I think the capital is there. And I think now with COVID, people are less worried about investing locally, because with Zoom calls, I mean, we've had, I think, 17 ChaiTimes now, and more than half have had people on from Boston or other hubs in the US, and it's been great. You know, so I think the communities, it's much more, when we file intellectual property for our drugs, we don't file it for UK or for Europe, we file it globally, Japan, US, Europe, every time. So why can't, you know, the capital is now, I think it's changing. I think it follows the people and their success, and so it does make it easier when you had a success. So, you know, Harren ever wanted to leave Otsuka and start up again, he probably wouldn't have a big issue raising, you know, a capital to get started. So people, you know, as a venture, I a little bit sit on both sides of the fence, being an entrepreneur, biotech fund, everything else. And you do look for entrepreneurs that you can back at the end of the day, because you can't run 25 companies. So look, it's been a fascinating discussion. We've kind of gone full circle talking through what makes a successful biotech, to virtual, non-virtual, collaboration, partnerships, finding out what's going on at Oxford, and getting updates from there as well. I mean, you guys, all three guys have done amazing things for the industry, very successful in your own rights, and it's been a real pleasure to talk about some of these issues on this ChaiTime. So I really appreciate your time and coming on here today. So on that note, yep.
Get more insults from Harren.
Yeah.
I'm well behaved. Thank you very much, Sunil.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Good to see you, man. Take it easy.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
We'll see you in our next ChaiTime will be back in 2 weeks, and will be chaired by Big Brother Shah, who's recruiting a young executive CEO who's raised a significant amount of capital in the biotech space, and he'll be coming onto this onto the ChaiTime then. So look out for that one. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.